If you're suffering from sciatica, it's important to know about some of the rare causes of this problem because sometimes they can be the reason you've got it. Hi everybody, my name is Will Harlow and I'm the Over-50s and Sciatica Specialist Physio here at HT Physio in Farnham. And today I'm going to be revealing 5 rare causes of sciatica that it's vital for you to know about. Now, before we dive into the content of the video, if you haven't already, please hit like on the video and subscribe to the channel using the link in the bottom right, because then you'll be the first to hear about our sciatica videos when they come out. And if you're enjoying this channel, I'd really appreciate it if you share the channel with a friend or a family member who might benefit, because then you'll help that person out and you'll also help us to grow. So I'll be really grateful to you if you do that. Now that that's been said, let's talk about sciatica and reveal some of the causes that are a little bit less common that can lead to this issue. Now, when we say the word sciatica, we're not referring to a condition as such, we're referring to a set of symptoms. And sciatica just means nerve pain in the leg. Typically, classic sciatica is nerve pain that runs down the back of the leg. But when we say sciatica more loosely, we're talking about any of the nerve pains that can happen in the leg. So pain that can go down the front or the side or the back. Now, sciatica can also lead to pins and needles and numbness in the legs or the feet. Sometimes it can lead to weakness in the leg as well. But it can be a very, very painful condition, and it's one that has a number of different causes. Now, there are common causes to sciatica, and I've made videos on this issue. You can see a video that I'd recommend in the top of the screen. And the common causes include things like disc bulges and herniations and problems with the facet joints in the spine, things like arthritis. But there are rare causes of sciatica that we're going to unpick today because they're equally important to know about. Now, the first rare cause of sciatica is something called a spondylolisthesis. Now, this is a complex term, but what it means is a change to the structure of the skeleton. So I'm going to show you what a spondylolisthesis is. And here we have our spinal model. So we've got the pelvis here, we've got the discs here that live in between these white things, which we call the vertebra, and these are the bones. And if you look at the way the bones are stacked up in the lower spine, they're all stacked perfectly on top of each other with a disc that separates them. Now, a spondylolisthesis is what happens when one of the vertebrae slips on top of the other one. So basically, if we have a spondylolisthesis, what will happen is, let's say this vertebra here moves forward on the other one. So we end up with like a step. So the vertebra should fit together like this, but instead they're now like this. So one of the vertebrae has moved on top of the other one. And a spondylolisthesis sounds very dramatic, but in fact it's quite common. It happens to a lot of people and we typically think of it as part of the aging process. You can also have different grades of spondylolisthesis. A grade 1 is about a 25% slippage on top, and typically those don't cause much in the way of symptoms. And you can have all the way up to a grade 4 spondylolisthesis, which is a complete slippage of one of the vertebrae on top of the other ones. Now, the way that a spondylolisthesis can cause sciatica is if these bones move forward or that one moves backwards. You can see here that we've got the nerves that leave the spine here, and there's a nice convenient gap for these nerves to live in. But if one of these vertebrae slips forward, that gap gets closed down and everything in the middle of it gets squashed, including the nerve. So if a spondylolisthesis causes that gap to close suddenly, you're going to get a pinching of the nerve, and because that nerve runs all the way down into your leg, you're going to get sciatica as a result. Now, a spondylolisthesis tends to be worse for people when they're standing up or leaning back. That often makes the symptoms feel worse. Sometimes their symptoms can be worse when they lean forward and they have what we call a sustained flexion. So typically washing the dishes and things like that can cause pain. And it also shows up in a number of clinical tests we do in the clinic here. Now, depending on how bad a spondylolisthesis is, you might be able to get it better with rehabilitation, but in some cases, a spondylolisthesis requires surgery. It all depends on the individual and the age and how bad the spondylolisthesis is, so make sure you get checked out by a doctor or a healthcare professional for some personalised advice for you. Now, the second rare cause of sciatica is something called discitis. Now, discitis is not a musculoskeletal condition. It's not something to do with the joints and the muscles and the way that the body is moving. It's actually an infection, and it's an infection of the discs. So the discs are these things here. They live in between the vertebrae, and if you get a bacterial infection that invades one of your discs, you can end up with a horrible infection inside the disc itself. The discs are made of mostly water with a nucleus inside, which is like a fluid center. And that nucleus is filled with nutrients, but unfortunately it can also act as a breeding ground for bacteria. So if you have an infection that invades the body and it somehow gets into the discs, it can lead to a very nasty infection inside a disc. Now, discitis is usually incredibly painful. It causes dramatic lower back pain, and it can also cause symptoms down the legs. So if you had a terrible sudden onset or a rapid onset of back pain and sciatica, it's important to have discitis ruled out. Most people who have discitis will also feel generally unwell. So if you've been very unwell, if you've been sick, or if you've had an illness, or you feel very run down over time, and then you develop this problem, that could be an indicator that it's discitis. Now, discitis is an emergency. It needs to be treated very, very quickly, or it can cause considerable damage. So make sure you get checked out by your doctor if that's the way that things have come about for you. If it's bacterial, typically it can be treated with antibiotics, but those might need to be intravenous, so you might need to take a trip to the hospital. But usually discitis resolves as the infection gets better. So if you've got extreme pain and you've also been feeling unwell, then go and get checked out right away. Now, the third rare cause of sciatica is a spinal tumour. Now, a spinal tumour can be cancerous or non-cancerous. We've seen both cases in the clinic. But typically what we're talking about here is a mass or a tumour that has started to grow around the spine. And when it reaches a certain size, it either presses on one of the nerves here, or it even presses on the spinal cord itself. Now, non-cancerous tumours can develop just about anywhere in the body. And if that happens in the spine, then pretty much you've just been very unlucky. And with cancer, it's actually very rare for a primary tumour to occur in the spine. It's typically a secondary tumour. So if you've had cancer elsewhere and then you develop back pain and sciatica, that would absolutely warrant an investigation, typically an MRI scan, to rule out a secondary tumour. Now, a lot of people come to see me with back pain and sciatica, and the first thing they say is, I'm really worried that it's cancer. And usually I can put their mind at rest, because primary tumours in the spine are very rare. So unless they've got active cancer in the body elsewhere, or a very recent past medical history of cancer, we tend to be less concerned about these people. However, that being said, the other signs to look for if you're worried about a tumour in the spine causing your sciatica are things like rapid weight loss. So if you've lost 5% of your weight in the last kind of 6 to 8 weeks, that would be concerning. If you've lost your appetite, that's another sign. If you've got more pain when you're lying down in bed than when you're walking around, that's another bad sign. If you've got non-mechanical pain, so pain that doesn't really change when you move around, it's either there all the time or it's not, that's another sign that it could be something more medical rather than musculoskeletal. And if you've been suffering from a general feeling of being unwell, that's another sign that it could be something like this. And if you've got very bad night sweats or night pain, that's another sign. Now, all of these signs on their own can be a sign of lots of different things, and most of them are harmless. For example, night sweats is more often a symptom of the menopause than it is cancer. But if you have back pain and sciatica and one of these other symptoms that I just mentioned, it is worth getting checked out just to rule out anything sinister. Now, the fourth rare cause of sciatica is a spinal fracture. Now, spinal fractures you might think of as very dramatic, and for people who are under the age of about 60, usually, yes, it has to be like a car accident or a really bad fall that will cause a spinal fracture. But as people get older, the incidence of osteoporosis increases, and this can make spinal fractures more likely, even in innocuous injuries. So osteoporosis is the process of thinning of the bones, and it doesn't happen to everyone, but it's more common in women over the age of 50. It's typically linked to the menopause. Basically, it's characterized by the bone minerals inside our skeleton being deteriorating over time. So the bones end up thinner and more brittle as a result. Now, osteoporosis in the spine is quite common, and if you end up with osteoporosis in your vertebrae here, you can end up with what we call a crush fracture, which is where the vertebra stays in place, but the bone in the middle of the vertebral body has crumbled and been crushed, and this can change the shape of the skeleton. Now, if the spinal fracture changes the shape of the skeleton down here and it affects the gaps where these nerves live, it can pinch a nerve, and that can lead to sciatica. So if you're over 50, if you're female, if you've got a family history of osteoporosis, and if you felt a drop in your spine, which can be another sign, then it's definitely worth getting checked out. An X-ray should be able to spot the fracture, and if in any doubt after that, then maybe an MRI is needed. So a spinal fracture can be another rare cause of sciatica. And then the fifth and final rare cause of sciatica that we're going to talk about today is piriformis syndrome. Now, this might come as a surprise to you because you probably, if you've looked online, have seen piriformis syndrome as a big cause of sciatica. It causes 30% of sciatica cases and all this nonsense that I've seen written online. And the fact of the matter is, piriformis syndrome is incredibly overdiagnosed. It's actually a lot rarer than most people think. And piriformis syndrome is characterized by a problem with one of the muscles that lives in the hip. It sits about here if we're looking at the skeleton. And basically what it is a very small muscle that lives deep inside the buttock. And in some people, the sciatic nerve passes through it. And for those people, if the piriformis gets tight, it can pinch the sciatic nerve, and that can give the symptoms of sciatica. Now, the reason piriformis syndrome is so rare is that in the literature, it looks like only about 10% of people actually have a situation where the sciatic nerve passes through the muscle. The other 90% of people have their sciatic nerve passing safely underneath it, far out of the way of any trouble. So right at the start, we've ruled out 90% of the population in people who could even potentially suffer from it. Then we've only got 10% of the population, and of that 10%, it's going to be a very small number that end up with a tight piriformis. Now, the reason piriformis syndrome is overdiagnosed is because people say, oh, I've got this pain in my buttock and now it's spreading down my leg. And the first thing that pops up online is piriformis syndrome, because those are the signs of it. But those are also the signs of disc problems or facet joint problems or any of the other causes of sciatica as well. So don't automatically assume your sciatica is piriformis syndrome. I've been treating sciatica for years and years and years. I see at least 2 or 3 people with sciatica in this clinic every single day. And I have probably only seen 4 or 5 true cases of piriformis syndrome throughout my whole career. There have been lots of people who've come to me thinking they've got piriformis syndrome, but not that many who actually do. Quite often, it's something other than piriformis syndrome. So those are the 5 rare causes of sciatica. Let's just have a recap of what they are now. So number 1 is a spondylolisthesis. Number 2 is discitis. Number 3 is a spinal tumor, which can be cancerous or non-cancerous. Number 4 is a spinal fracture. And then number 5 is piriformis syndrome. So those are the 5 rare causes of sciatica. There are obviously more causes of sciatica as well that I haven't covered, but these are the 5 that I felt it was most important to identify. And if you're in any doubt, make sure you get checked out by a professional. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please leave me a comment below and let me know. And if you want to get more from me, you can pick up a copy of my book. It's called Thriving Beyond 50, and it's got loads more tips and strategies and advice, just like the stuff in this video. So if you enjoyed this video, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you on the next one.